Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty profound. How to really connect with God
Yeah.
and our main source. Get this, a Christian podcast that uses the analogy of falling in love.
Oh, wow.
Now,
It's interesting.
I don't know about you, but that's not the first thing that pops into my head when I think about prayer. But trust me, it gets really interesting. So, are you ready to dive in?
Let's do it. It's so relatable, right? I mean, think about it. When
Yeah.
you're head over heels for someone, you make time for them, you put in the effort, you want to be with them, you're constantly thinking about them.
Right.
And this podcast is suggesting that we should approach our relationship with God with that same kind of intentionality and passion.
Okay.
So I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, that makes sense. But they
Yeah.
take it a step further. They actually quote Isaiah 54.5, "For your maker is your husband." I'll be honest, that one threw me for a loop at first.
Yeah, I could see how that would be a little bit jarring,
Yeah, a little bit.
especially out of context.
Yeah.
But it's a powerful image, and I think it's crucial to remember the historical context here. In ancient Israel, marriage wasn't just about romantic love. It was about a covenant,
Right.
a deep, unshakable commitment. So using this metaphor really emphasizes God's unwavering faithfulness to us.
So it's less about a literal husband-wife dynamic and more about the depth of that commitment, that bond. Okay, that helps me see it in a new light.
Right.
The podcast also talks a lot about spending quality time with God, like actually comparing it to a date.
Interesting.
They even bring up Revelation 21.2, which says, "She has made herself beautiful like a bride waiting for her husband."
Wow, there's that marriage imagery again.
I know, right?
But notice the feeling that it evokes.
Mhm.
Anticipation, excitement,
Right.
that eagerness to connect with someone you love.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of energy that the podcast wants us to bring to our relationship with God.
So it's not just about showing up for church on Sunday.
Right.
It's about actively wanting to spend time with God, nurturing that connection.
Exactly. It's about that daily interaction.
Right. But how do we actually do that?
Right.
Life gets so busy,
Oh,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
I feel like I'm constantly running from one thing to the next.
Does the podcast offer any practical suggestions?
Absolutely. One of the key things they emphasize is the importance of daily prayer.
Okay.
And not just like, rattling off a to-do list,
Right.
but really taking the time to connect with God on a deeper level. They suggest finding a quiet space, a place where you can be alone with your thoughts and with God,
Okay.
and treating it like a conversation with someone you deeply care about.
So really being present in that moment,
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, not just rushing through it.
right?
It's about quality time.
Right.
Makes me think of Deuteronomy 6.5. Remember that one? It talks about loving God with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your strength. That's the level of devotion they're talking about.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. It really makes you realize how much we should be pouring into that relationship.
Right. So they're advocating for daily prayer. But are they talking about like kneeling by your bed every morning kind of thing? Or is it more flexible than that?
It's not necessarily about the form of prayer.
Okay.
They actually talk about creating what they call a secret place.
A secret place. That sounds kind of intriguing. Tell me more. What is a secret place and how do we find one?
So it's not so much a literal location like a hidden room or something.
Okay.
It's more of a state of being.
Great.
It's about consciously setting aside time and mental space where you can truly be present with God, free from distractions.
Right.
Think of it like creating a sanctuary in your mind, whether it's a quiet corner in your house, a walk in nature, or even just a few minutes of stillness in your car before you start your day. It's all about intentionally stepping away from the noise of the world and just focusing on your connection with God.
Yeah, I can see how powerful that would be.
Yeah.
It's so easy to let the demands of life, all the busyness and distractions, crowd out those quiet moments of reflection.
Absolutely.
I know I'm definitely guilty of that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes practice.
Right.
But think about it. If we approach our time with God with the same anticipation and excitement that we'd bring to, say, a coffee date with a friend or, a
Yeah.
special evening out,
Yeah.
it would completely change the experience.
Absolutely. It's like we're giving God the best of ourselves, not just whatever scraps of time and energy we have left over at the end of the day.
Exactly. And that makes all the difference.
Right. So it's not just about the quantity of time we spend with God,
Right.
but the quality of that time, the intentionality behind it.
Exactly.
I love that. It's such a simple yet profound shift in perspective. So we've talked about the secret place and being intentional with our time. But I'm curious, what other practical advice does this podcast offer for deepening our connection with God?
Well, they actually have a bunch of really down-to-earth suggestions. They even suggest treating our time with God as we would a date with someone we love.
Okay, now that's an image I can get behind. So instead of just squeezing in a few minutes of prayer whenever I remember, I should be more intentional about setting aside time,
Yeah.
making it special, really putting thought and effort into it.
Exactly. Just like you would for a date.
Yeah.
Think about it. You might choose a nice outfit,
Right.
pick a special location,
Right.
maybe even bring a small gift. Now, obviously, you're not literally doing that for God, but it's the same concept.
Right.
It's about bringing that same level of care and attention to your time together.
I love that analogy. It makes the whole concept of spending time with God so much more approachable and even exciting.
I know.
What other practical tips did they mention?
Well, they talk about creating a dedicated space for prayer.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be as simple as a comfy chair in a quiet corner of your house or a spot in your garden where you feel particularly connected to God.
Right.
The point is to have a designated place where you can consistently go to connect with Him, free from distraction.
I see. So it's about creating that sense of intentionality, having a physical space that reminds you, okay, this is my time to focus on God.
Exactly. It's about creating those boundaries,
Yeah.
separating yourself from the busyness of life.
Right. So it's not just about our internal state, but also our external environment.
Exactly. And it's amazing how powerful those external cues can be
Oh,
in
absolutely.
helping us to shift our mental and spiritual focus.
Yeah. It's like setting the stage for a meaningful encounter.
Yeah, I really like that. It's
Yeah.
like you're setting the stage for a sacred moment.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It's just about creating that sense of intentionality and purpose.
Totally. And another practical tip they mentioned was to engage your senses during prayer.
Engage my senses. How do you do that?
Well, instead of just praying silently in your head, try incorporating elements that appeal to your different senses.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you might light a candle to create a sense of peace and focus, or play some calming music that helps you feel more connected to God.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's about making it a more immersive experience.
Yes, exactly. It's about engaging your whole being.
Wow. I've never thought about incorporating my senses into prayer before, but I can see how that would make it a much richer and more meaningful experience.
Absolutely. And, the beauty of it is that there's no right or wrong way to do it.
Right.
It's all about experimenting and discovering what works best for you.
Right. Finding what resonates with you personally.
Yeah. Because ultimately, it's about deepening your personal connection with God in a way that feels authentic.
And what I love about all of this is the emphasis on personalization. It's a reminder that our relationship with God is unique and special,
Yes?
and our prayer life should reflect that individuality.
Yeah.
It's not about following a set formula or trying to be like someone else. It's about discovering our own unique path to connection.
I love that. It's about finding what works for you and honoring your own spiritual journey.
This is already making me rethink my own approach to prayer,
All right.
and we've only just scratched the surface of this podcast.
I know. And we haven't even gotten to the really juicy parts yet.
I know. I can't wait to dive deeper and see what other insights this podcast has to offer.
Me too. But, before we move on, I think it's important to acknowledge that all of this can feel a little overwhelming at first.
Oh, absolutely. It's a lot to take in,
Yeah.
especially if you're used to a more traditional or less intentional approach to faith.
Right. So remember, it's not about adding more tasks to your to-do list.
Yeah.
It's about finding ways to deepen your connection with God in a way that feels authentic and fulfilling for you.
I think that's such an important reminder. It's not about striving or trying to earn God's love. It's about being open to experiencing it more fully in all the ways He chooses to express it.
Exactly. And it's about being kind to yourself on this journey.
Yeah.
There's no pressure to do everything perfectly or to have all the answers right away.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. And as we continue this deep dive, we'll explore even more ways to nurture that connection and experience the transformative power of God's love in our lives.
I'm excited to see where this conversation takes us. But for now, I think we've given our listeners plenty to chew on.
I agree.
So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll delve even deeper into this fascinating podcast and uncover even more practical insights for deepening our relationship with God. Stay tuned.
So, We've been talking about creating that secret place and being intentional with our time with God.
Yeah.
But this podcast goes even deeper, suggesting we should treat our relationship with God kind of like we would a romantic relationship.
Okay, now I gotta say I'm a little apprehensive about that. Isn't comparing God to, like, a boyfriend or a girlfriend a bit much?
I can see why you'd say that.
Yeah.
It's definitely a bold analogy.
Yeah.
But remember, they're using it to highlight a key point, which is passion.
Okay.
Think about all the energy you pour into a new relationship,
Yeah.
the excitement, the longing to connect. The podcast is saying we should approach God with that same level of passion and desire.
That's an interesting way to look at it. It's not about reducing God to a human level, right?
Exactly.
But it's about elevating our level of engagement, bringing that same intensity and enthusiasm to our spiritual lives.
Exactly. So how do we practically cultivate that kind of passion in our relationship with God?
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
Well, the podcast suggests focusing on God's love for us. They point out that just like in any healthy relationship, receiving love is just as important as giving it.
That's a good point. It's easy to get so caught up in our own efforts,
Right.
praying, reading the Bible, going to church,
Yeah.
that we forget to pause and simply receive God's love. It's like we're so focused on giving the perfect gift that we forget to open the one we've been given.
I love that analogy. It's so true.
And you know what? I think that's where that passion comes from. It's when we truly experience and appreciate God's love for us. That's what ignites that fire within us.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing and appreciating all the ways God expresses his love for us, which can sometimes be really subtle.
Yeah, that's true. It's not always these big dramatic displays.
Right.
Sometimes it's the quiet moments, the little things that we might otherwise overlook.
Exactly. And the podcast highlights how noticing those small acts of love, like a beautiful sunset, a moment of unexpected joy,
Yeah.
a kind word from a stranger, those can be little glimpses of God's love shining through
And when we start to pay attention to those things, we start to see God's love everywhere.
everywhere.
Yeah.
And it changes our whole perspective.
It's like we're training ourselves to see the world through a lens of love and gratitude.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating a sense of awareness,
Yeah.
being present in the moment,
Hmm.
and recognizing God's presence in our everyday lives.
And that presence can be so powerful, so life-giving.
Absolutely. And I think that's what the podcast is getting at.
Yeah.
When we start to experience God's love in a more tangible way, it changes everything.
It really does. It moves us beyond a sense of duty or obligation
Yeah.
and into a place of genuine delight and joy.
Exactly. And that's when our relationship with God truly starts to flourish.
Yeah, because when we see it as a source of joy and fulfillment, it naturally becomes something we want to invest in, nurture, and prioritize. It's no longer a chore on our to-do list. It becomes a cherished part of our lives.
Exactly. And that leads to another crucial aspect of any relationship: communication.
Okay, but how does that translate to our relationship with God? I mean, we can't exactly pick up the phone and chat.
Right, of course not. But we have prayer, which is our direct line to God.
Okay.
It's our way of sharing our hearts with him, our joys, our struggles, even our doubts and fears.
So what they're saying is that we need to be more open and honest with God in our prayers.
Yeah, exactly.
Not just like reciting memorized verses or presenting a polished version of ourselves.
Right. It's about being real with God.
Yeah.
Authentic, vulnerable.
So it's like having real, raw conversations with God, not just delivering a monologue.
Exactly. It's about letting God into those messy parts of our lives, the parts we usually try to hide.
And knowing that he loves us anyway, no matter what.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that vulnerability is what creates true intimacy in our relationship with God.
Mhm.
It allows us to experience his grace and compassion on a whole new level.
It's like we're saying, God, this is me, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right.
And I trust that you love me anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful thing.
Because then we can truly experience the freedom and healing that comes from being fully known and fully loved.
Yes. And that unwavering love is the foundation for everything else.
Because it gives us the courage to be ourselves, to grow, and to become the people God created us to be.
And as we experience God's love more deeply, it naturally begins to change us from the inside out.
It's like that love becomes a catalyst for growth, helping us to shed old patterns, embrace our true selves, and become more compassionate and loving individuals.
That's a beautiful cycle. The more we open ourselves to God's love, the more we're transformed by it, and the deeper our connection becomes.
I love that. It's a dance between giving and receiving love, and through that dance, we become more aligned with God's heart and purpose for our lives.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So what I'm hearing from this podcast is that it's not about just going through the motions of religion.
Right.
It's about cultivating a relationship with God that is vibrant, passionate, and life-changing.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that God desires a deep and personal connection with each of us, and that he's actively pursuing that connection.
And that he's not some distant, unapproachable deity, but a loving father who wants to be close to his children.
Yes, and when we grasp that truth, it completely changes how we approach our faith.
It shifts the focus from us trying to earn God's love to recognizing that he already loves us unconditionally
Right.
and is inviting us into a deeper experience of that love.
And that's where the true adventure begins.
It really does. So we've talked about passion, communication, receiving God's love,
Yeah.
all these important aspects of building a strong relationship with God. But the podcast also mentioned something called the secret place, right?
They do.
What exactly is that, and how does it fit into this whole picture?
It's a really interesting concept. The secret place isn't so much about a physical location
Okay.
as it is about a state of being.
Okay.
It's about creating a space, whether it's a physical space or a mental space,
Yeah.
where we can be completely present with God, free from distractions.
So it's like a sanctuary,
Yeah,
a
exactly.
place where we can intentionally set aside the noise and busyness of life and just be with God.
Exactly. It's about carving out time and space to connect with him on a deeper level, to listen to his voice, and to experience his presence in a more tangible way.
I love that. It's like creating a sacred space for our souls to reconnect with the divine.
Beautiful. That's a great way to put it.
But I have to admit, the idea of finding that secret place in our fast-paced, hyper-connected world can feel a bit daunting.
I agree. It's definitely a challenge.
With all the demands and distractions vying for our attention, it's easy to let those quiet moments slip away.
It is. So what advice does the podcast offer for creating and maintaining that space?
Well, they emphasize the importance of being intentional. Making a conscious choice to prioritize our relationship with God and to create space for him in our lives.
So it's not going to just happen magically.
Right.
We have to be proactive.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be some grand, elaborate gesture. It
Right.
could be as simple as setting aside a few minutes each day for quiet reflection or finding ways to incorporate prayer into our daily routines.
Well, yeah, just little things.
Oh, it's about weaving those moments of connection throughout our day rather than trying to cram it all into one big chunk of time.
I like that.
It's about finding those little pockets of peace and presence amidst the chaos.
Exactly. It's about making our relationship with God an integral part of our lives.
Yeah,
Not something we compartmentalize or relegate to Sunday mornings.
that makes so much sense. It's about making God a part of every aspect of our lives, not just a separate compartment.
Exactly. And, the more we practice this,
Yeah,
the more natural it becomes.
right. It becomes less about trying to force it and more about just being open to God's presence in every moment.
And you know what? I think that's what the secret place is all about.
Really?
It's not so much about a physical location.
Okay.
It's about cultivating a state of heart, a
Yeah.
place of peace, presence, and connection that we can access anywhere, anytime.
I love that. It's like we're carrying that secret place within us wherever we go.
Exactly. And the more we cultivate that awareness,
Yeah.
the more those secret place moments will naturally start to happen.
It's like we're training our hearts to be more attuned to God's presence.
And as we do that, we discover a whole new level of intimacy and joy in our relationship with him.
This has been such a great conversation. I feel like I'm seeing my relationship with God in a whole new light.
Me too. Amazing how this one podcast has sparked so many new insights.
It really is. It's like we've been given a whole new roadmap for navigating our spiritual journey.
And remember, it's a journey.
Yeah,
There's no rush, no pressure to get it all figured out overnight.
exactly. It's about taking one step at a time, being open to new discoveries, and most importantly, enjoying the process.
And as we do that, I think we'll be amazed by how much our relationship with God can grow and deepen.
This has been such an inspiring conversation, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling just as fired up as I am.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to see what the final part of this deep dive holds.
Me too. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll explore some of the most profound and practical takeaways from this podcast and how you can apply these principles to your own life. Stay tuned. Okay, we're back, and I'm still buzzing from that last conversation. As we've been talking, it hit me that we often get so focused on what we bring to the table, our prayers, our time, our efforts.
Yeah.
But what about God's side of things? How does he express his love?
That's a great point. And actually, the podcast addresses that directly. They encourage us to think about God's love language.
God's love language. I like that. Just like we all have different ways of expressing and receiving love.
Exactly.
So it's not just about feeling God's love in a general sense, but recognizing those specific ways. He shows it to us. So how do we decipher God's love language? Are there clues we should be looking for?
Well, they suggest paying attention to how he speaks to us.
Yeah.
Is it through nature? Maybe you feel closest to God when you're surrounded by his creation, like out on a hike.
Right.
Or maybe it's through music. A certain song just lifts your spirits and you feel God's presence so strongly.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a sudden sense of peace that washes over you in the middle of a chaotic day.
Yeah.
These could be hints about how God is communicating his love specifically to you.
I love that. It's like a treasure hunt, looking for those little whispers, those moments that feel infused with meaning.
Exactly. And the more we tune in, the more we'll notice those unique expressions of his love. It's like learning a new language. At first, it's all gibberish, but the more we immerse ourselves, the more fluent we become.
So it's not just about passively receiving, but actively engaging or seeking, noticing, learning to recognize those personal touches God weaves into our lives.
Exactly. And that effort deepens our appreciation and strengthens that bond. It's like when someone speaks your love language. It just hits different, right?
Absolutely. It feels more personal, more impactful. So by understanding God's love language, we can not only experience his love more fully, but also respond in a way that truly resonates with him.
Exactly. It's like we're learning to speak each other's language, which allows us to communicate on a much deeper level.
Wow, this is amazing.
Eh,
We've gone from falling in love to deciphering love languages. This podcast has seriously reframed my whole perspective on connecting with God.
I know, right? It's all about pushing past those conventional ideas and discovering new ways to experience that relationship.
And at the end of the day, isn't that what faith is all about? It's a journey of discovery and deepening intimacy with God.
Beautifully said. And, the exciting thing is that this journey is never over. There's always more to explore, more to discover.
This deep dive has definitely sparked a renewed sense of excitement for that journey within me, and I hope our listeners are feeling it too.
Me too. And as you continue exploring, remember there's no right or wrong way to do this. The most important thing is to find what resonates with you, what helps you feel that spark of connection with God.
So it's about personalization, experimenting, giving ourselves permission to discover what works best for us.
Exactly. It's your unique relationship with God, your journey to nurture and cherish.
This has been such a mind-blowing conversation. I feel like I've been given a whole new toolkit for deepening my connection with God.
And I hope our listeners are feeling inspired and equipped to embark on their own exploration.
To wrap things up, is there one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember from this deep dive?
I'd say this: your relationship with God is an invitation to intimacy, an ongoing adventure of love and discovery. So embrace the journey, be curious, and allow yourself to be surprised by the depths of his love for you.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a real pleasure exploring these ideas with you. And until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep diving deeper into the mystery and wonder of God's love.